Hello, Felix.
Hello, Steve.
Hello.
How are you doing?
Fine, thank you. Fine, thank you. And how are you there in Brussels?
Yeah, the weather is good. I don't know. I just had some sunlights right now.
Okay. You know what interests me is, this world of polyglots on the internet is very interesting. There's a group of us that regularly strut our stuff, so to speak. You and Moses and Richard and Luca and others. But there's many more who don't appear on YouTube. I had a tweet from a fellow in Alexandria, had a bunch of exotic Arabic script, which I can't read. But he said, come on down to Alexandria, I'll brew up some coffee and we can speak in French and Italian and whatever, and when are you going to learn Arabic? And I just think it's a wonderful community, and I think the big message is we can all learn many languages. I really believe that. What do you think?
I think it depends on the language. Actually, I needed some help for Arabic because it's a very different language.
Right.
And actually, we cannot read Arabic without some small grammar rules. But except Arabic, I would say for other languages, I did not have huge problems to learn them because we know how to learn. Actually, it's the way to learn that we discover throughout the years.
Right. Although, in looking at your videos, I mean, we will have some minor areas of disagreement because to some extent, not disagreement, but I think we all recognize that every person is going to find their own path. You know, to get from A to B, we all get to B, but some people meander a little bit over there and some people meander a little bit over here, but I think the basic principles are the same. But let me ask you a question. I was reading a blog which is written by my Russian teacher at Link, who lives in the Ukraine, and she has a blog in Russian about language learning. And it just so happened that this morning I was reading her blog, and she said that there was a study done that showed that in Chinese, the distinction between the verb and the noun is less clear than in English, and therefore the brain operates differently. And therefore, when Chinese people go to learn English, they don't make this clear distinction. A lot of detailed stuff about how the brain deals with different languages. So I want to begin by asking you, because you speak Asian languages and European languages, and so do I, and I was never conscious of the problem that my brain might have in jumping from one language to another. Have you found this to be an issue at all?
No, I found it helpful actually when I learned Japanese and then jumping to Turkish because of the similarities of grammar, syntax. I found it very useful. I felt like a second Japanese, I said in my latest video.
Right.
And I don't think there are much interference between languages that I learn. Like when I learned Japanese, actually, I know the kanji in Chinese because I learned the traditional form way of writing. And, but my brain is still thinking in Japanese. I don't read the kanji in Chinese.
Yeah.
Even if, it's a bit weird to explain. When I read in Japanese, even if I know how to pronounce the character in Chinese, I don't read it in Chinese. In my head, it's in Japanese.
Okay.
And it's unknown.
Okay. Now, all right, let's step back then. The language is like, if you say, okay, Chinese, French, English, Spanish. Which of these four languages do you speak the best?
Obviously French, because it's my native language.
Okay. So if French is 100, where is Chinese, presumably Mandarin? I don't know if you speak Taiwanese as well, but let's say Mandarin. So French is 100. Where is Mandarin, English, and Spanish, roughly?
I don't know. Actually, Chinese, I was forced to learn Chinese because my dad wanted me to learn Chinese to be able to communicate when I would go back to Taiwan and to be able to read. So I did not experience any, let's say, love with Chinese, and if it's my second language. But so I did not read a lot in Chinese. I just read what I had to read for my Chinese classes.
Right.
So my Chinese is not that good. It's not that bad. it's a little bit boring. Like when I speak with Taiwanese people or with Chinese people, they know that I'm not from Taiwan or I'm not from China.
Right.
So I don't know, 70, I don't know.
Would it be better or worse than your English? Like, to me, your English would be pretty close to...
In terms of vocabulary,
yeah.
I think poorer, because I don't read a lot in Chinese.
Right.
But in terms of fluency, I don't know how to define.
Oh, okay. Anyway, but the reason I asked that is because this article seemed to suggest that someone who say grows up as we did, speaking an English, like a European language, that our brains would be structured differently than someone who grew up from infancy speaking Chinese, and that therefore that's an obstacle as you try to go from the one language group to the other. And I must say that I didn't find that, because Chinese has its difficulties, but it's just a collection of patterns. And once I get used to those patterns, I'm happy. Russian, with all of the complicated case endings and imperfective and perfective verbs, and to my mind is more complex than Chinese. The biggest problem with Chinese was just learning the characters.
Yeah.
And learning to pronounce the tones. But insofar as the structure of the language, nouns versus verbs or any of that stuff, like, I don't think in those terms at all. And I feel that whatever research they did to show that Chinese people would be, or Chinese speakers would be at a disadvantage learning a European language, or vice versa, that has not been my experience. And that's why I was thinking, in terms of hopping back and forth between a European language and, say, Chinese, just because Japanese again is different, but I don't feel that our brains are at a disadvantage. It may very well be that a European language is more difficult. If Chinese were written without the characters, it would be, in fact, an easy language to learn.
I think. When you read that article, people are thinking that they are leaning on Chinese to learn English, or they are leaning on English to learn any other language. So the thing is that we have to just try to learn a language without thinking in another language.
Right.
If we don't compare languages, it becomes easier to learn a second or a third language, I think.
Yeah.
We don't have to compare. If we compare, it's not going to work.
Right. On the other hand, as you say, if you have either vocabulary or structural similarities between languages, then that's going to help you. So I'm very encouraged to hear that your Japanese helped your Turkish. That makes me want to go out and learn Turkish.
Yes,
so, yeah. Interesting. Okay. And I saw in your videos that you like using Pimsleur to get started, and then you move on to Assimil. And then from there, what do you do? Typically,
I changed a little bit my technique. Actually, I used Pimsleur for Japanese because I had to feel, how would I express it? Develop a feel for the language by hearing it. And at the beginning, I have to learn very basic words. And Pimsleur was helping, although it was a little bit boring, always repetitive. But I think it was good to learn Japanese. And then when I moved on to Turkish, I did not use Pimsleur because I had this Japanese structure in my head. So I could just easily change it and just think in Japanese when I learned Turkish. And then after Assimil, I would typically move on and try to read magazines. I read magazines a lot in Turkish, and it helped me a lot. And then newspaper, and to accumulate new words. And
but if you're reading these magazines, are you looking the words up, or how are you getting the words?
Yeah, actually, I underline all the words I don't know. And maybe at the beginning, I have 50 words, maybe 60 words per article. But it's not an issue. I just look it up on internet, and I just write it like let me show you. Like for an article, I would write it like that.
Right.
Just list of vocabulary, but not to study in the list. Just to to write it and to have some sort of a mental image of the word, and then I would read it again, and it's much clearer when I get the meaning, and then I would just let the text for maybe 2 days, and I just go back and read it once, 3 days after just read it once again, and 1 week after just repeating. And then I think when you read related articles, the words are always coming again and again, and eventually get used to reading that word. And then the problem is to convert from passive to active. Actually, I learned words like a cushion, and in Turkish a cushion, and I was like, when am I going to use the word cushion in Turkish? I said, okay, it's not the point is not about wondering when I will use that word, and the point is just learn a lot of vocabulary, and you'll see you will learn, you will eventually use it, but you don't know when. Actually, I went on, and you have to create those opportunities where you can actually use the words you learned in your input sessions. So I went on a plane, and I was thinking of which word I could use with the Turkish hostess, and I was seeing they had some cushions there, and I just said, could you get me a cushion in Turkish? And then I used the word cushion once, and then when you use it twice, your brain gets to, it converts from passive into active knowledge of the word.
Yeah, no, I think that's an interesting point that I mean, we all want to speak. That's the goal. We all want to get there. If we don't have a lot of words, then it's difficult to say anything. So I tend to agree with you. I tend to work very heavily on building up my passive vocabulary. And when the need arises, and when you're put in a situation where you need to use the language, you stumble, you look for words, but eventually, as the need and the opportunity arises, all of that passive vocabulary, I find, starts to come. But there are things that we can do, I think, to improve our ability to speak. But ultimately, if you were to go to Istanbul and spend a couple of weeks there, all your hard work in terms of building up this vocabulary is all of a sudden going to bear fruit, so to speak.
Yeah, it paid off when I went there. And
oh, you were there, yeah?
Very nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I spoke, maybe I went there 1 week, and I spoke for maybe more than 20 hours.
Wow.
Like, I could just sit next to a fisher and just say, hello, how are you? And they will try to strike a conversation. And people are very different from Brussels. Here it's kind of weird if you try to speak with someone you don't know. Right. But in Turkey, it's very normal.
Right. Yeah. No, I must say, to different people, different national groups, they react differently. When you, I mean, I found, for example, with Chinese people, they're very welcoming if you speak their language. Koreans are a little bit more standoffish. Depends who you manage to happen to meet. Some people are some nationalities are just strangers. They kind of stay away from them. But so it depends. It depends. One quick comment on I have often said this. I prefer not to use Pimster because of all the English that's on their recording. So I don't like doing it. I also don't like the fact that they force you to speak. I don't like being forced to speak. I also am not a big fan of Assimil because I try to acquire words, whereas Assimil forces you to look at a whole translation of the text. So then if I'm missing a word, I got to go looking through the translation to find the word. I would rather have, either as you're doing, look up each individual word, which is easier to do on the internet. Whereas to have to pour through a translation to find the meaning, I'm not. But that's just me. I would say that a lot of people like Pimster and Assimil. I'm happier just go after Teach Yourself or Colloquial, or I start up at Link as I did with Czech, but like you, I want to get to the magazines or books or newspapers or the authentic material as soon as I can. I
did use Teach Yourself, but I don't like Teach Yourself. I learned my Spanish through Teach Yourself, a French version of Teach Yourself. It's called Arab's Méthode Bilingue. And I did learn a lot, but I don't like Teach Yourself because it's always a situation like you want to know how to order coffee, you want to know how. And
teach yourself is not quite. No, I wouldn't say that's necessarily true.
For some languages,
Okay,
like
yeah.
when you open a Teach Yourself, you know the first lesson will be about hello, how are you, or I don't know, very basic things.
Right. But you know, I kind of feel that, I mean, it doesn't matter whether it's Teach Yourself or Colloquial or SML. To me, the first couple of months, you've got to cover that basic stuff one way or another. So it almost doesn't matter. And I will typically, before we had Link, like I'll just go out and buy Teach Yourself and Colloquial and cover the same material in, you know, two different directions. Because you just have to, at first the language just sounds like noise. So you have to develop, so it's not very interesting. There's not much you can do to make it interesting in the initial period, I find. But it's just that it's so exciting. The initial discovery of the new language is so exciting that kind of maintains my interest, even though the actual content that I'm reading or listening to isn't very interesting. But I hope to get out of that within a couple of months. So some people, they go for graded readers and they want everything to be just a little bit more difficult, which is perhaps ideal. But I find that very often that means uninteresting content. So I tend to move to content of interest as soon as I can. But I mean, we all have.
It's very important.
Right.
Like when I learned Japanese, I would typically read something where I would search for look up a lot of words, but the topic is interesting to me.
That's
than
right.
Something where I don't have to look up that many words, but it's not interesting to me.
Right.
Because I would not be like motivated to read it 10 times or 15 times. So I would just try to choose some interesting content. That's very important.
Now, how many languages do you, I mean, you're obviously much younger than I am. What's your goal? How many languages do you want to learn?
Actually, I don't have a fixed goal. I think it's evolving, and I don't actually choose languages. I didn't know I would learn Turkish. It just came to me, and actually, the funny thing is that it was a Japanese friend that recommended me Turkish, and I was like, why do you want me to learn Turkish? I was like, okay. I was learning Polish at that time, but I just stopped Polish because I did not find a lot of natives around me, and I don't know, I didn't feel the right vibe with the Polish, so I started with Turkish, and yeah, I'm here. I learned Turkish for about 2 years, and I think I'm going to carry on studying Turkish and Arabic. And I don't know. I learned the language when I find a community. I find a Turkish community. I learn Turkish, and it's easier to practice on a daily basis or on a weekly basis, let's say. And I find it very hard to learn small language or a very rare language, like, let's say, I don't know, Armenian.
Yeah.
If I'm going to learn Armenian, I'll eventually get discouraged because I don't have natives around me,
Right.
and I cannot get in touch with the culture.
Right.
And when we're speaking about Turkish, I went to Turkish parties. I could see how people greet each other, and you can learn the real language,
Right.
not the textbookish language.
Right. But to be fair, you know, I think we all agree that people have different motives for learning languages. And I mean, I have had no contact with any Czech people here in Vancouver. And I'm getting tremendous enjoyment out of reading about Czech history and so forth, and discovering the language. And of course, I do talk to some of our Czech tutors. And I'm going to go to Prague in October. But, I mean, Moses, for example, studies all kinds of remote, you know Moses, right?
Yeah.
He studies all these, not obscure languages, but we'll call them minor languages. And so I think people can have different interests. And so I feel in language learning, it doesn't matter whether you go in depth or whether you just do them a little bit, whether you do them because you like to socialize, or whether you do them because you're interested in discovering Armenian. I mean, it might be very interesting. I don't know, Hmong or something. whatever. Like, it's all different manifestations of the human, experience. So I think we can all have different goals. Listen, maybe we'll stop now, and we'll have, because the other discussions I had with Richard and with Luca, we didn't really get into any Asian languages, so maybe we'll speak for a while in Chinese. So I'm sure we could talk for another 3 hours, but I think we have to stop here, and we'll switch over to Chinese. So I'm going to stop the recording, and we'll start up again. Okay, bye for now, and thank you.
Thank you, Steve.